咏春，叶问6年筹划，叶问强势再现，甄子丹强战拳皇泰森，打出中西武学新巅峰。叶问3，12月24日延续传奇。
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pantheon Plus. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. On tonight's episode, we are going to be continuing our examination of the Yip Man franchise. Tonight, we will be discussing Yip Man 3. My co-host for this week and every week is Brian. You can find him on Twitter at BrianToBrain, and you can follow us at Hero Pantheon on Twitter. Continue to leave those 4 or 5 star reviews on Spotify and Apple and all of your favorite podcasting devices. Please also continue to support the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing, including Kevin Ford and I, as we have been discussing Party Down, the third and final season. Matt and Ben have been examining the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 4. Boy, if we did a news podcast, boy, Marvel would just be a huge part of that. But we are not. We are going to be continuing our discussion of Yip Man 3. And Brian, I have to say that coming off of Yip Man 2, I felt confident. You know, I feel like we got a really good first movie. I think the second one was not as good, but I was like, okay, I feel pretty good. They kind of know the formula. They kind of know how they're going to do this. And then the third one changes the formula, and I think it is a significantly worse movie than the first two. I think that there has always been a hint of melodrama attached to this franchise in a weird way. I will say the melodrama always comes from nationalism and this jingoistic tendencies of these movies being kind of very pro-China and anti, in the first movie, it was anti-Japan. The second movie was anti-UK. As we'll talk about next week, they go heavy in on the United States. But this one is not nationalistic at all. And it's very melodramatic, but the melodrama is coming from the fact that in the reality of this world, his wife dies of stomach cancer. And this is a character that we have not been given any reason to care about. She literally was barefoot and pregnant in the second movie. And now all of a sudden I am supposed to be invested in the idea that he is going to spend time with his wife because she is dying. And I guess for me, fundamentally, that means that this movie is not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of break away from the formula, even though they still kind of follow it a little bit, where it saves up to the last 15 minutes where the big fight happens with the not-so-bad guy in this case. But I don't know, I just feel like this movie still kind of feels like the Ip Man movies, where the Ip Man movies usually start out with a completely different plot in the first 45 minutes, and then switches to a different plot in the next 45 minutes, which I've noticed in these movies. And it still does that, but I feel like they just had no focus in the first half until they started focusing on his wife in the second half with the cancer stuff. And listen, it's melodramatic, it's exploitive a little bit, but hey, I got a little teary-eyed. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a sucker for good drama sometimes if it's really, it's pulling on your heartstrings. But it took a while to get there because in the first two movies, I really wasn't feeling her character, especially the first movie. I thought she was just so awkward. But I mean, it wasn't such a big payoff in this movie. Like, I felt like they chose a time so deep in the franchise to give her something to do that it was too late because they were killing her off anyway. So it's like, oh, you're giving us this good stuff. Like, we never see them as a couple doing stuff. So that was cool to see. But then it's just like, it's not going to matter because he should have been doing it when she wasn't dying, I feel like. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it just shows he kind of took like her for granted all for 2 movies or all these years, and all of a sudden he wants to spend all this time. But I guess that's real life, right? Where it's just like you take someone for granted, and then once you realize they're leaving you from this life, you want to take advantage of that time you have with them, right? I get that, but it just feels like it just made Yip Man this guy that kind of ignored his wife for the first 2 movies. So I don't know. It's a mixed bag. I enjoyed the time they had together at the end of the movie. It's just, again, I wish we had more of that in the series, so it leads to more of emotional, goodbye. But in this case, it was just kind of like set up to kind of give you like, oh, she's dying. You know what I mean? So it just kind of sucks the way they set that up. And then again, like, it kind of sticks to that formula where the first 45 minutes are a completely almost different plot line. And in this case, they went with a police story gimmick. And I was just texting Jerome like, this is a police story mini movie within the Yeet Man movies. And it's hard to deny because he's pretty much playing Jackie Chan at the beginning, and he's defending a school where there's no cops defending the school, so he's in like a cop by default. I don't know. Very weird plot, and then it leads to this, clash of styles within the Wing Chun form. And then, this other dude, this other father accuses him of not being a true student of Wing Chun. Like, where did this come from? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I felt like they threw some stuff at us that they should have been building up to. But, like, the only thing they have been building up to correctly is him smoking, which is a payoff in the next movie, but we'll talk about that later.
The other big headline in this movie is the fact that we get a very special appearance by Iron Mike Tyson. And all I could say is I get the logic of, okay, we had a boxer in the previous movie, so we have this opportunity to bring in Mike Tyson. We're going to have Mike Tyson fight Donnie Yen as Yip Man. I totally understand that temptation, and I totally get it. But the moment, and here's the other thing I want to say, Mike Tyson cutting promos after boxing matches is both morally deplorable, but it's also really entertaining. He is a tremendous talker when it comes to being a boxing promo. But anytime you take him out of that, when you put him in professional wrestling, when you put him in movies, and you expect him to deliver dialogue, it is no bueno. And I think The Hangover kind of makes it work because The Hangover is a comedy and the scene is very comedic. And I think there's so many other people in the frame, like they really make it work. But as much, I think the Mike Tyson fight scene is probably my favorite in this movie. But I do have to say, Mike Tyson's dialogue, especially the dub dialogue, it doesn't come off very well. That's all I'm going to say.
First of all, I couldn't believe that Mike Tyson was in this. Second of all...
Yeah, I told you not to look at the cast list for these movies.
But I started remembering, like, my buddy telling me about some Mike Tyson stuff because he listened to his podcast. And then I started to remember that he was in the movie, and the fact that Mike Tyson doesn't remember that he was in this movie, which makes total sense if you know who Mike Tyson is, because he would totally forget that he was in this movie. So it was just this weird, like, flashback reminder that he was in this, and I'm watching this just going like, wait, is he going to talk? And then he starts talking, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like Tyson. And then I started realizing, oh, he had his lines dubbed in because, they couldn't understand what he was saying with the lisp or whatever. And you know what? I'm going to go even further as saying that I think they superimposed his face on a body double on sometimes, which we'll talk about another possible digital body double in this movie, but I'm just throwing it out there because that fight scene looked a little too, I don't know, too digital at times. And I kept thinking, like, Mike Tyson's face looked like it's imposed on someone else's body, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
It's a real problem with a lot of movies that everything feels very digital. And I think part of it may be where they're filming it. I think part of it is that, maybe they're not in the same room at times. I think that's a huge problem with not just this movie, but I think a lot of the Marvel movies have this issue as well, and even some Star Wars stuff too.
Yeah, it was throwing me off because I was like, well, he's there, but at that times, like, when he's during the fight, which we'll talk about, it just seems like it was a body double, and I was like, what is going on here? And then what topped it all off for me is that I think they tried to explain as to why Tyson was even in the movie and who he was. But by the end of it all, it didn't matter. It just didn't fucking matter because he disappears. Again, the whole idea of we're going to just abandon the plot of the first half of the movie and go on with another plot in the second half of the movie. So, again, very confusing stuff because this is kind of where the police story ends. And then it goes into the whole melodrama part that leads into the finale. But I think Tyson was just completely, like, not only miscast, but, like, unneeded. And I don't know what that role was needed for anyway, but, like, I would have just got a guy like Terry Crews, who can give you dialogue, who's got the look, who could be there and be reliable. He could do the fight sequences. I think that would have been a better choice.
But I think that I understand where you're coming from, but does this movie draw as many people? Because I know you wanted to talk about the box office. Like, this movie makes a ton more than the previous two movies, and the final Yip Man makes even more than this one does. And I think what you start to see is you are seeing a proliferation of Yip Man movies, because the Grand Master also comes out between the release of the first one and this one. You're getting some comedic Yip Man movies, so you are seeing this dead person becoming like a franchise of movies. And just like when one superhero movie, it bespokes a lot of others, I think you're getting that exact same situation with Yip Man as well, as he kind of has become a franchise unto his own, to the point where Donnie Yen did not even want to consider playing the character again. And it took some convincing, and I'm sure a very fat paycheck was written to want Donnie Yen to come back. And the producer, Raymond Wong, also not necessarily interested to come back, but they had this idea of bringing in Bruce Lee, potentially as an adult after being a child in the second one. So, there was a lot of hesitation to even make this movie. But, I think that one of the appeals was, okay, we're going to bring in Mike Tyson because the prospect of him fighting Donnie Yen is going to draw people to the movie theater.
Yeah, I think that was the international draw. So, in terms of the box office, I wanted to mention it. So, these movies have about a $35 to $45 million budgets, right? And they started to gross more and more, and like pretty much double each movie. And it's kind of like the Austin Powers effect. I always kind of use that as like the prime example. Batman Begins, where a movie comes out and then there's this kind of like small gap in between the first and second one, and it kind of builds a small fan base. And then it just starts building a fan base because it's like, word of mouth and DVD. And this was what, between the second movie, the third movie, it was 2011 to 2015. So 4 years. And in that time, people were still doing the whole like, well, people are streaming now, but I feel like a lot more people were doing the whole like DVD rental thing way even like then. And that's how like a movie like Batman Begins was able to garner that fan base for the second movie. Not to mention the Heath Ledger stuff, but I mean, if you look at the numbers, Dark Knight like completely overgrossed Batman Begins, like engulfed it. So, and the same thing with Austin Powers 1 and 2. So I feel like this got this international like fan base to it, and that's what kind of built it up. That's my theory.
The DVD thing is very real. I mean, look at the John Wick franchise, which really took off because the first one was kind of an under the radar hit, and then it really took off when it went to VOD as well as DVDs. And I think that's a very real thing, because since then each John Wick has kind of made more than the previous one. I think that is also the case for Austin Powers, as you mentioned. I think big time it's the case for The Dark Knight. I mean, the Batman Begins was a very good movie. I think people very much hesitated to see it after the disaster that was Batman and Robin, but The Dark Knight was a cultural phenomenon that I am not sure that, I mean, I guess Avengers Endgame to an extent, but there was just something about The Dark Knight that I don't think is ever going to be recaptured, in terms of just completely capturing the zeitgeist and just completely engulfing the culture for an entire summer, it feels like, with the hype, the actual movie, and then, some of the discussions and some of the things that came up afterward. So I think that, this movie is also a benefactor of that as well. And of course, you do have Bruce Lee in the movie being played by an actor. Originally, they were going to have a digital performance. They were going to CGI superimpose somebody on a body double with facial motion capture performance. But Bruce Lee's estate threatened legal action over the copyright infringement. And I don't know about you, Brian, but it very much comes across like, given the way that Bruce Lee was treated in the film industry, and kind of footage being used after his death, literally showing footage of his funeral in a movie, I can understand why the Bruce Lee estate is like, you know what? How about don't do that?
Yeah, there's this whole thing about that since Bruce Lee's death. I think I mentioned it during the game, Enter the Dragon review. But they wanted to complete a lot of some of his projects that he didn't even bother to start yet, or the ones that were in production. They had to finish them off, and they got body doubles to finish off. And you mentioned using the funeral. I think that was Game of Death, which they found the footage later on and showed it in the documentary. It was way better than the footage they put together to finish the movie. But that's a whole other story there. But it goes kind of back to that. And I would actually recommend an obscure comedy that no one really knows about from about 2008. Very, very under the radar. It's called Finishing the Game, and it's kind of like a mock documentary about finishing the movie after Bruce Lee's death, and all these people are auditioning to kind of become the Bruce Lee body double. And at one point, there's this white dude that kind of makes it to the final four cut. So that's just making fun of it all. But I kind of get why, because there was a lot of that going on, and the Lee family has gone through a lot, obviously. And I'm not surprised, because they were really exploiting the Bruce Lee's death a lot after it happened, and it was just kind of like you see all these knockoff movies, and then all these like knockoff like Bruce Lee names, like Bruce Lee or Bruce Lowe or something like that. You know what I mean? And it's just kind of like, I see why, and it's really messed up. And I'm glad they didn't do it here, because I think it would have just taken me out of it too much. I'm glad they just casted a guy that kind of just looks like him anyway, and he fits the role. And I just wish that, I don't know, because we've seen him do all these great athletic things and martial arts stuff, but to see him as a 16-year-old just being like a dance instructor, that would have been more interesting. But they only showed him for like 2 minutes doing the dance instructing thing, and they didn't even show him dancing. So I wanted to see Bruce Lee dance, because I think he's got some dancing chops. And I also have this theory that like kung fu masters are like really good martial artists, or karate masters deep down could be really good dancers too. But that's just my theory.
So at one point, Mike Tyson broke his index finger while filming one of the fight scenes with Donnie Yen, even though Donnie Yen's wife was concerned that he was going to get hurt himself, which is bizarre to me, because just like wrestling, it's fucking fake. So, I mean, I guess by accident it can happen, but this is also not 25-year-old Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is a little bit more mature at this point. The real Bruce Lee began learning Wing Chun from Yip Man when he was 16 years old. Unfortunately, of course, he passed away way too young. Danny Kwok Kwan Chun, who played Lee, seeking him to be his master, was 40 at the time of his filming, and it's pretty wild to think about. Some historical notes, because again, this is not a history podcast, but every movie kind of in some way is portraying a historical part of Yip Man's life. So in this case, it might be good to look at Bruce Lee and kind of his actual relationship with Yip Man. So Bruce Lee was not necessarily a direct student of him. The reality is Lee was one of the students in Yip's school. Lee's direct instructor was Wong Chun Lung, himself a student of Yip Man. A letter from Lee to Wong expressed, even though I'm technically a student of Yip Man, in reality, I learned my kung fu from you. So we have a written letter that says who Bruce Lee says was his instructor. And Wong was known for his participation in illegal undergrounds martial arts competitions, where he was rumored to be undefeated. Wong retired from participating in these fights after accidentally blinding an opponent. Where's that movie? That's the movie I want to see. Over the course of his lifetime, Yip probably had several students, some staying for a few months, others for longer, maybe for a few weeks. This explains the existence of people who claim lineage from Yip Man. So I also want to point out a historical aspect about his two sons, which, yes, he has two sons. I hope you are hopeful of not seeing the first one, because you will not. In the fourth movie, they completely forget that he even has an older son, Brian. I don't know if you realize that, but his first son does not exist in the fourth movie, and he is merely mentioned in the third movie.
Man, they fucking Richie'd him, man. Or is it Richie Cunningham? Or I don't know. The older brother that disappeared in Happy Days.
The girl from Family Matters who went upstairs and never came down. I mean, it's
yeah,
one of those
it
things.
Sucks, because he's probably in his 20s right now, and he's mid-20s at this point, and he's got a lot going on in his life.
That is incorrect. If you look at the reality,
or in his 30s, I don't know.
Ip Chun would have been 35 years old, and in 1959, the younger son, would have been 23. So they were both adults at this
The
point.
hell's going on, man?
The
It's weird. It just this timeline. Ugh. You said it before. If I think about it too much, it'll break me.
You cannot think about it too much because you are going to break. You are going to be broken.
Yeah, it's breaking me now. But I get it. But there's a lot of inconsistencies in this series, and they just don't focus on continuity. And I get that, but I don't know. It's just weird how they'll bring people back in terms of continuity and flashback to past events, but then kind of forget that he has this other kid. Yeah, it's weird, man. It's very weird, but I don't know. It's it's for the sake of storytelling, I guess. And yeah, I mean, no one cares about Richie's older brother, I guess.
Yeah, I would say so. I think in terms of looking at the plot of this movie, I really like the opening sequence where they show just how fast Bruce Lee is, and you get these great moments with the cigarettes and just kind of showing how fast they are. And I was really into that. I was like, okay, this is off to a really good start. And then we grind this movie to a halt as Yip Man's younger son gets into a fight. And there's a lot of back and forth about that. We get a lot of interaction with the school. We get a tease of a romance between two characters that we've never really seen before. So they're trying to get that going. In an hour and 48-minute movie, you have that. You have the cancer. You have the Bruce Lee part. You have the Mike Tyson part. You have this character, Chung Tin Chi, who is from the same lineage of Wing Chun. But he kind of becomes a master. So they're doing all of this stuff. This is one of those movies. Again, it's the same amount of time as the first two movies, but there is so much going on that what ends up happening is just like, I think whenever you get a situation where there's a movie with too much going on, it ultimately feels like nothing is happening.
I don't know why they had to do Police Story. And I know just hear me out. Like it's the type of police story thing where it's like a gang is trying to get revenge on either the public or some kind of other cop or something. And this is exactly that, but we don't know why this gang is like torturing this school. Did they mention that, or did I miss that? What is going on here? And then they're defending the school and the cops are not defending the school. So it's just like, what the fuck is going on? Yet he's friends with a cop, Fatso, and Fatso's like, we can't really do anything about it. And then they start doing something about it way late in the movie. So I don't know. I don't know what they were going for, but this is the kind of police story movie that would be a Jackie Chan thing and then finish out the movie and that plot line and kill the bad guy. But they didn't. And the bad guy from the first 45 minutes doesn't even get killed or get beat up. He just runs away out of a window. So I don't know what was going on with this plot line. And it somehow leads to Mike Tyson, because Mike Tyson is the boss of this guy. So I don't know what the hell they were thinking and why they even did this, because it was just like this giant thing they had to get out of the way to get to the real part of the movie with the wife. And then the other Wing Chun master. So I get why they set this up, so they make the Wing Chun master this criminal that kind of turns and then becomes this grand master, and I get that. But, I mean, they spent a lot of time focusing on this gang. The fight was cool, and I'm not really a big fan of the fights in this movie, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but that did look good. The problem is, I think, is that Yeet Man is very technically sound, right? In terms of his martial arts and kung fu or whatever. But when he's fighting normal people who are just like normally doing street fighting, like I mentioned with the Police Story stuff a couple weeks ago, it just doesn't gel, because he's trying to do this technical stuff and the other people are trying to do this rough street fighting stuff, and it just doesn't click. And I texted Jerome, it's like, again, another wrestling reference, it's like watching Ricky Steamboat doing a death match. It just doesn't work, because Ricky Steamboat does not work in a death match. You know what I mean? He works in like these great technical masterpieces, and that's what Yeet Man is. But when you put him in the street fight situation, it doesn't really gel. The only time it really worked is when he was using the sticks and he wasn't using his legs. So it was just like pure violence with the sticks, and that worked because it was a street fight. So that's kind of where I'm at. And, I kind of noticed, I'm going to say it right now, Sammo Hung is not the fight choreographer for this movie. It's someone else listed. But even Donnie Yen says, he did a lot of the work on the fight choreography for this movie because, Sammo Hung wasn't there.
I agree with you. I don't think the fights are as good. I think the two best bits of choreography, I don't even know if the Bruce Lee thing would be considered a fight, But I like that, and I like the Tyson fight. I think those are the two highlights. Even the final fight, I think, is pretty disappointing, and I don't think is nearly as good as it should be. And I think that part of there's so much that you could say about like the school plot line, but I think we've seen this a lot where you have a gang coming from the outside and they're invading a small town, and the small town has to defend itself. I think you even got that in a Yip Man movie previously, but in this case, there's no nationalism, like there's no rah-rah China, and again, in a weird way, I think it actually hurts the movie. And the fact that they kind of go back to it in the fourth one, I think is proof that they understood like what makes these movies good is having that pro-China aspect. And again, I think it's one of those things where you get this in the United States too. I mean, you look at the Rocky movies, they are very much rah-rah America in a lot of ways, and the Top Gun movies, and like it's definitely propaganda, but just because it's propaganda doesn't mean it's devoid of value either. So yeah, I definitely struggled with this movie a lot, and there were just a lot of aspects to it that I didn't think worked nearly as well. And I think that this movie, compared to the previous two, it feels different from the first two, but it feels different in a way that doesn't really enhance our understanding of who the character is. Like you mentioned with some of the fighting, I don't think some of the fighting was nearly as good, but also the styles clashing and whatnot. And it's funny you say that the street fighting didn't work, because I think at the end of the second movie, he has a fight with a boxer, and I think that actually works out. I think the way that they structured that fight, I think it works. But in this movie, I agree with you. I think Jackie Chan is somebody who can make a street fight work because he has comedic elements to his fight scenes, and I think he's able to kind of adapt. I don't think that in terms of who Donnie Yen is as the Ip Man, and I can't speak to some of his other work because I just can't speak to it. But I think in this case, I don't see the styles clashing being nearly as interesting in this movie as the end of the second movie.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, and I felt like the second movie really nailed that style down because it was like, Wing Chun versus all these different fighting styles, not just dudes off the street. And in this case, the first half, it was dudes off the street, and they were again like they were even doing the whole like the bad guy is this kind of like he's kind of evilly like comic evil bad guy with the glasses and everything, and it was just like this feels like Police Story 2.5 or something. So, it just kind of threw me off. And then, once you get to the cancer stuff, that's when it kind of slows down a bit. I just don't know why they abandoned the storyline. You know what I mean? It's just like, why do they do this? And they just don't pick it up again, and the guy gets away. And we don't even know if they come back to the school or not or whatever, and why are they even going to the school. But it all leads to Mike Tyson, who's the big boss, and it leads to the big fight in the middle, and Jerome's a big fan of it. I like some of it, but I felt it went a little too, like, wow, they did a lot of damage in this dude's office, and he just didn't care. You know what I mean? Like, and then at the end of it all, like, why even fight for 3 minutes? What was the whole point of him fighting for 3 minutes? You know what I mean? It's just like, what are we doing here? Like, okay, I get it. You want to fight Mike Tyson, but give us a good reason to fight Mike Tyson. Like, I don't know, because they just meet up, and he's like, I want to fight you for 3 minutes, and Tyson's dialogue is a little messed up.
I think it's one of those things. They wanted him to fight Tyson, but they also did not want him to fight a boxer or go into a boxing match again. So I think it's like, okay, we need to have this fight, but we need to have it like be important, but also not be so important that it takes away from the last fight. So you can't give Yip Man the definitive win. So yeah, it's a strange choice all around, because it's like, okay, we're gonna bring in Tyson for a special appearance, but it's not really gonna go anywhere.
Yeah. So if you want to relate this to like wrestling booking, I guess this be like if Hogan faced off against a special challenge, it went like Broadway with the guy. It did go over. You know what I mean? So it's just weird because we're so in this franchise, we're so used to him going over like every fight. He just goes over. In this case, this was like the first time it went 50-50, I think. And oh no, the Sammo Hung fight in number 2 as well, but it rarely happens in the series. It's usually him kicking ass and winning. Um, it just threw me off. So but overall, I think once we slow down and kind of do the melodramatic stuff, I think the second half is way better than the first. But that's just me. And then you mentioned the fight at the end. It's kind of weird how we even got to that fight at the end because I'm not sure if he's a bad guy or not, and why is he like so anti Wing Chun? Like they never explained that.
It's kind of like they're going for like a best friends turned enemies situation, but we don't like it's again, we don't have any time to really build up a friendship between the two. I almost would have preferred if they had taken a character from a previous movie, brought them back, and kind of did something. But yeah, the dynamics of this movie just don't work. I think that's where I come down. And I know you like the second half a little bit better. I kind of feel equally about both halves, and I think that's kind of where I come down, is that I think there are some positives in the first half, there are positives in the second half, but I ultimately don't think that it really adds up to being anything. And I think the ultimate messaging of the movie is so bizarre too, because instead of like saying how great China is, like we have this moment where Yip Man is saying the idea of spending time with their loved ones is more important than competing with others, which is ironic because he literally just got done competing with somebody and has been competing for the last 3 movies. So how do you say that? And then you're like, you can't tell the story of Yip Man competing without having him compete against people, but yet you're also trying to have him spend time with his wife, and that's really not working because, like, for me, when I sit down to watch one of these movies, I'm like, boy, I really want to see Yip Man dance with his wife. That is not, the movie hasn't made me, like, in the first movie, if they had better established her as a character, if they had hired somebody who maybe was a better performer, maybe somebody with romantic chemistry with Donnie Yen, then I could be like, okay, I'm interested, let's go with it. But the problem is that the performance wasn't great in the first movie. There was nothing to go by in the second movie. So I cannot invest in the story that they're trying to tell because, again, these two don't really have chemistry with each other. I struggled with that part of the movie. And then you also have the villains who it never crystallizes into something consistent. Like, yes, there are a bunch of villains in the fourth one too. And I think that the fourth one certainly has its problems, but the biggest thing for me is that there's a coalescing around themes, and like there is a clear purpose for what the villains are doing at the very least. In this case, nothing was ever clear. There was such a lack of clarity in this movie that's ultimately why I think it did not work nearly as well as the first two.
And then the end fight was interesting because it wasn't like how do I say this? Because we're so used to especially the last two. The last two fights end with this like beatdown, like a bloody beatdown, right? This didn't have that. It just had a fucking broken rib. He punched him in the rib, and I think he broke his rib, and that was it. So it was more respectful in that manner, I guess. But I was just thinking, like, why is this guy so hung up on Wing Chun? Like, what is it about this part of like martial arts that just drives him? Is it the fact that like he wants to be the best and he's just burying Wing Chun just to put himself over, even though he's a Wing Chun master and it's just different styles of Wing Chun? It's just so weird. Like we never got to why if you really just want to go bare bones to it, just tell us like, hey, I want to be better than you, and that's all, and just give us that. Not this whole thing about I have to go beat all the other masters and get my name in the paper and get his attention. He already has his attention. He doesn't need to go in the paper. You know what I mean? It's like, why are we going through this thing again from the first movie where we beat up the grandmasters of all the other fighting styles just to prove that Wing Chun is the best, which happens again in the fourth movie. So again, it's just rehashing. It looked cool at times, but again, that fight sequence at the end was like, it looked good at points, but I felt like there was some kind of like, the violence I think was missing, and I hate to say that, but when you're building up the finale in the last two movies and you do a bloody beatdown of the bad guy and you don't do it here, it's going to throw you off. And it threw me off because I was like, he didn't beat him down to a bloody pulp like he did the other guys. And it just ends. So And then it does the whole title crawl again with with the message at the end. And again, it's playing its cards where it's if it's playing it safe where as if it's not going to this is like the last movie of the series, so they do the title crawl where like and Wing Chun spread it and he spread Wing Chun all over the world. And then it's like it says that for like 2 and 3 and 4 at the end of the movie. So again, it's like the same it may not be the same formula exactly, but it's doing the same. It's trying to go over the same beats from the previous movies, but it's just too much, and you feel like what happened to the first plot of the first half of the movie? It just disappears.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate, and it's one of those things where when we talk about how to do a franchise, I think there's always the tension of, okay, we need to try to do the same thing, but bigger and better. And I think this movie is trying to do something a little bit different, which I think is problematic because we kind of know like what the first 2 movies have been, and then we're going to try to change up the formula, and we're going to try to put perhaps more stakes in this movie, and it doesn't work. I think this movie almost would have been better if they had just come into this movie and said, the wife had died of cancer already, and he was kind of struggling for purpose, and his purpose is codified by saving this town and the school from these gangsters. And again, it's a plot we've seen a million times before, but I think there's at least a little bit more purpose. I think you get away from some of the melodrama. You also get into some Rocky Balboa territory, but for God's sakes, I mean, Ip Man 2 was literally a remake of Rocky 4. So if you're going to remake another Rocky movie, you could do a lot worse than Rocky Balboa.
Yeah, because at times it kind of creeps into Rocky 5, and then Ip Man 4 pretty much turns into Rocky 5 at times. So it's very like on the line.
I would say a better version. Rocky 5 insults my sensibilities. Ip Man 4 does not. So
well, we'll talk about that because it kind of insulted me in some ways with the dialogue and the delivery of dialogue by some American actors.
But that is a separate issue, and they're definitely not American actors, Brian.
Excuse me. Actors playing American. Actors playing American. But yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, these poor UK people
and Australians. Australians try to hide their accent. But yes,
there are some Australians, but I looked at most of them do come from the UK, so it is worth pointing out. We'll get into that next week. But for me, I really only have 2 strengths. I think Donnie Yen is as good. I don't think his performance suffers. I think he is as good in this movie as he is in the first 2 movies. I like the Tyson fight scene, but other than that, that's pretty much it as far as the positives go.
I will say this. I think the cinematography is better than the previous 2 movies. I'll give it that. I think the lighting is better. The colors are about the same as the second movie, but I do think the lighting is much better. Like, if you compare the lighting of the first one and how dark it was compared to the fighting sequence at the main event in this one, it's so brightly lit, and it looks great. I'll give it that. Like, it looks very pretty, and you can see a lot of detail in the background of the guy's restaurant or whatever it was, or studio. It looked really good. I'll give it that. The music was okay. They brought back the Yeet Man theme. So that's kind of the positive. I do love him, whenever I see Yeet Man doing the rapid punches, I mark out now because that's kind of like Donnie Yen's signature move in movies now. Because, like, whenever The Rock does a rock bottom in a movie, people mark out. Whenever I see Donnie Yen doing rapid punches, which I kind of saw in John Wick, dude, I marked out at the theater when that happened. So there you go, his signature move, and it's on display here. And then, of course, the negatives, I pretty much went through all of them. I think that the script is really terribly put together. Some of the performances, borderline, cringeworthy, but I think, like I mentioned, that villain from the first half of the movie, the guy that's kind of the leader of the gang, he's doing this shtick where it's very much the villain of a police story movie, where it's like comedic, but he's evil and he's the son of a bitch. But it goes almost borderline cringy with the way he's acting, almost over the top. So it kind of borders that, and it's kind of like, okay, we're not putting the right kind of character in this movie that we need, and we're doing too much of a Jackie Chan police story movie. But again, they just abandoned the plot, so it kind of sucks. But I guess we got to also note that this leads to the spinoff with Batista and Michelle Yeoh. because what's his name, Tin Chi is the one that is the star of Master Z, right?
I believe so. We will not be reviewing that movie. We will be only going to Yip Man 4 because I'm getting a little Yip Man'd out at this point. And yeah, I think as far as I'm concerned, the weaknesses are everything is just a little bit worse, and there's no primary theme of nationalism, which I can't believe I'm saying that's a bad thing, but I really think it is. And look, if Top Gun did the same thing, I would probably have the same critique. If Top Gun wasn't as pro-America as it was, then probably wouldn't be as good. My MVP and best performance, it's Donnie Yen this week because, again, this movie is just kind of a mess, and I can't really justify giving the director the MVP in this case.
I agree. He probably held it together, man, because if he didn't want to come back and do it, this movie's not going to happen, right? They're not going to recast him. He's too much of a big deal in this role already. So, credit to him for sticking through it.
As far as this iteration goes, I mean, they've had a bunch of people play Yip Man at this point. It's
right, but this particular Donnie Yen version is kind of iconic at this point, legendary at this point. Like, I mean, if he, because even in the, what he says about the second one, he's like, the reason he really was hesitant to do this one because the second one was such a classic in his eyes, and I kind of agree because that second half is like pure awesome sports entertainment. And I get that, so I kind of get where he's coming from. And like, if he didn't do it, man, yeah, a lot of people would have lost money on this gig because he wouldn't want to do it. But because he came back and he was willing to go, I don't know if he knew it was a bad script or not, but he was willing to tough his way through it. And and the fact that Sammo Hung wasn't there, and he was kind of like, he's on record saying that he helped choreograph a lot of the fight scenes, which he's kind of done that in other movies before. So it's not surprising. And, yeah, I'm not surprised because, Donnie Yen is kind of a man of all, not a jack of all trades, but he's pretty much on that level, like a Jackie Chan where he can produce, act, write, choreograph fight scenes, all that stuff. So, yeah, definitely MVP.
All right, so next week we will be discussing the fourth and final Yip Man as Yip Man will be going to the United States, specifically San Francisco. And they go to Chinatown, and boy, do I have some thoughts on that. But for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
So the jury's out on this movie, and it's definitely not hung enough.